Hi, Ioana. Great to be here with you. And yes, I've worked at Dow Jones for 8 years now. When I moved to New York, it was to oversee product development for Dow Jones, which means building websites, apps for brands like the Wall Street Journal, MarketWatch, Barron's. So the initial period of time that I was here was really focused on modernizing the digital interfaces for our key media brands. In the past 5 years, I've switched role to become Chief Innovation Officer. And really what the job is twofold. First of all, it's managing our relationships with the large technology companies. So that's Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and others. And secondly, thinking a little bit more deeply about where the media industry is headed and what are the disruptions that are coming down our way. And then also in a very practical way, figuring out how we adapt to changing environments. So an example is, what happened a year ago when COVID struck New York hard and we lost our events business. And so an example of the kind of work I do is to reimagine what an events business could be in a digital era. And that was a project that my team led. What I've really been focused on in the past 2 years, what I've predominantly been focused on, is trying to navigate the intersection of technology and news. And more specifically, I'm working with companies like Facebook, Apple, Google, and understanding where they're trying to head with news and how that could benefit a company like our own. So for example, I've worked very closely with Apple on the Apple News project. I've worked closely with Facebook on the Facebook News project. And at the moment, I'm very busy working with Google on the exciting News Showcase project. So what I've really tried to focus on more recently is this intersection of big technology and news. And the reason for that is it's simply become more urgent for us. What we're seeing is that the big technology companies are taking an increasing interest in news and making significant inroads into the news industry, which presents both opportunities and risks. And my job is to ensure that it's more of an opportunity than a risk. Yeah, they're very good at that. They're very good at the asking for forgiveness, not permission. Well, look, I think they have a few things that traditional media don't have. The obvious thing is they have engineers and they have data. And that's a very powerful combination because with the data, they're able to see with a high degree of precision how people are consuming news at scale. So if, for example, you run YouTube, you're able to see how long videos should go on for, whether videos work better if they're thematic or whether they're people-led. There's a whole body of data that can give you a strong indication of how to be successful with your product development. The media industry simply hasn't got that volume of data. And so the tech companies have that competitive advantage, which is really the data. And then sitting behind the data, the armies of engineers who have the capacity to build products rapidly and at scale. But there's one other thing that we should be mindful of is that the best of these tech companies are fearless. And I think that's something that the media industry can learn from. The media industry tends to be quite timid, quite conservative in terms of how it develops products, how it tests products. The media industry tends to be terrified of making any changes to its digital product portfolio. By contrast, you can see at companies like Snapchat and Google and Facebook that they'll have a concept, they'll rapidly prototype it, they'll test it in customers, and then they'll put it live and they'll look at the data and they'll see what's working, what's not working. And I think that culture of fearlessness is something that should inspire media companies, and they should attempt to be take a few more risks with their products. So I think that's something for us to be mindful of. I think on the print side, a lot of media companies are stuck in this situation where they have two different kinds of readers, if you like. They have the print native readers who may have been consumers of their products for 20, 30, 40 years. So that's a very important customer group. And then they have maybe a slightly younger demographic that tilts heavily towards mobile consumption usage. And I think that the risk is to try to impose a product on a consumer group. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a print reader, a traditional print reader, I may want to read my newspaper in print. I may want to read a digital version of that publication on a tablet or a smartphone. But I have certain habits that are very deeply ingrained and that we as publishing companies should respect. If I'm, on the other hand, a 25-year-old consumer of news, it's almost certainly the case that my preference would be to have a busier mobile interface that is perhaps a bit more urgent, that has the news that's right up to the minute. So I think that there's no escaping the reality that you probably have to have more than one product in the marketplace, and that both products need to be of a certain standard. And it isn't an and or, it isn't an or situation, isn't it? We either do a version for the traditional reader or a version for the modern reader. We need to do both. And that's really where we are at the media sector at the moment. It's a very important point, Ioana. And if there's one thing to take away from this talk, it's this, which is that media companies need to get a lot better at rapid prototyping and testing. So rapid prototyping and testing, I think that's the one critical learning that companies should take from Silicon Valley. So what does that mean? And I think it comes back to this concept of overcoming the fear, this incredible fear that media companies seem to have about developing their digital products and taking risks with their digital products. And the way that you mitigate those risks is you come up with concepts. You come up with concepts quickly. It doesn't necessarily cost you a lot of money. And you test it with your consumers, and you learn from that testing with your consumers. So it's kind of point number one, identifying a very specific customer pain point. Point number two, coming up with 2-3 different prototypes that maybe address that customer pain point. Point number three, then testing those prototypes with customer groups to understand whether this is the right solution or the wrong solution. If it's the wrong solution, you start all over again. You start prototyping again and you develop all over again. But that skill set, which is prototyping and testing, is something that media companies are not good at, and they'll need to get a lot better at it if they're to remain competitive over the next 5 to 10 years. You know, I think, that if we step back, media companies have been engaged in some sort of silent war with the big tech companies for the better part of a decade. And I think the opportunity looking forward is to come up with concepts which are more win-win, which are great for the media companies and great for the tech companies, which, let's face it, tend to control the distribution of our content these days. So I think what I am proud of is the work that I've done with Apple, with Google, with Facebook on their news initiatives, all of which now involve Dow Jones, and finding ways in which helping those technology companies develop their news products, we've done it in a way that is advantageous for the distribution of our news and advantageous for our business model. So I think that's probably ultimately the work that I'm most proud of. And as you'd have seen, we very recently announced a significant deal with Google. Yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that we're beginning to find a path forward with the technology companies that is great for the news industry and is great for our readers. Wow, that's a nice thought, thank you. I'll cherish that thought. But I think what it would be is to think maybe 2 to 3 years out, to think about where is the news industry taking us? Where's the technology taking the news industry? And what is the consumer experience that people want in 2 to 3 years' time? And then to be able to build that. And my thesis is it'll look something more similar to a Spotify type interface, and that'll embrace audio as well as text, as well as video. That'll be highly collaborative. It'll tilt towards engaging people in different ways in the news that we produce, and with a very strong interaction between content producers and consumers. So there's a great feedback loop. So I think it's good to create some sort of Spotify type interface for news that would be beneficial for the news industry, but more importantly, that is intuitive for a modern news consumer.
Edward, thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Ioana. Have a great day.